Dear learners, welcome to week 7 of module 6 on media and social movements. This is unit 23 on media and conflict. In this unit, we turn our attention to a critical and often sensitive area of media studies, that is the relationship between media and conflict. Conflict is not limited to wars fought between nations. It also includes political struggles, social unrest, identity-based tensions, protests, and movements demanding rights, recognition, and justice. In today's world, most of what we know about such conflicts comes to us through media. News reports, television debates, social media posts, videos, images, and hashtags all shape how we understand who is right, who is wrong, who is powerful, and who is vulnerable. Media do not simply reflect conflicts as they happen. They actively frame them. And this means media selects certain facts, voices, images, and interpretations while leaving others out. As a result, the same conflict can appear very differently depending on who is reporting it, which platform is used, and whose interests are being served. For social movements, this is especially important, and movements often rely on media to gain visibility, mobilize supporters, and challenge dominant power structures. At the same time, media can portray these movements as disruptive, violent, or illegitimate, affecting public opinion and policy responses. Now, with the rise of digital and social media, the relationship between media and conflict has become even more complex. Ordinary citizens can now document events in real time, challenge official narratives, and build solidarity across borders. However, this openness also allows misinformation, hate speech, and extreme ideologies to spread quickly, sometimes escalating tensions and violence. In this unit, we will critically examine how media operate during conflicts, especially through war journalism, online hate speech, and digital radicalization. We will also look at real-world case studies to understand how media can both intensify conflicts and contribute to dialogue, peace building, and social change. As learners of media and society, your task is not just to consume media content, but to question it, to analyze it, and understand its broader social consequences. So, by the end of this unit, you will be able to explain the relationship between media, conflict, and social movements in contemporary societies. You will also be able to critically examine war journalism with special reference to bias, framing, propaganda, and power relations. You will also understand the nature of hate speech and the processes of online radicalization in digital media environments. And after going through this unit, you will also be able to analyze national and international case studies to assess media's role in conflict escalation, de-escalation, and social change. Finally, you will be able to reflect on media ethics, the responsibility, and the importance of media literacy in conflict-sensitive communication. Now, we have been talking about the word conflict. Conflict is an inherent feature of social life. It may arise from political contestation, economic inequality, cultural differences, identity-based divisions, or struggles for power and resources. In modern societies, media play a central role in how conflicts are communicated, interpreted, and remembered. Conflicts rarely exist outside media representation. Instead, they are constructed and circulated through news reports, images, videos, social media posts, hashtags, and digital narratives. Now, within the framework of media and social movements, conflict becomes particularly significant. Social movements often emerge from situations of injustice, exclusion, or repression, and media serve as critical tools for mobilization, for visibility, and legitimacy. At the same time, dominant media institutions may frame movements as disruptive, violent, or illegitimate, thereby shaping public opinion against them. Thus, media operate as contested spaces where competing actors like states, movements, corporations, and citizens they struggle to define reality. Now, the expansion of digital and social media has further transformed the media-conflict relationship. While traditional mass media were once the primary gatekeepers of conflict narratives, today's media ecology is decentralized and participatory. Citizens can document conflicts in real time, challenge official versions, and build transnational solidarity. However, this openness also enables misinformation, hate speech, and radical ideologies to spread rapidly. Understanding these dynamics is essential for analyzing the role of media in social change. Now let's come to the second part of this unit, that is understanding war journalism and bias. Now, war journalism, it refers to the practices and conventions through which media report armed conflicts, wars, insurgencies, terrorism, and large-scale political violence. Historically, war reporting has been shaped by technological limitations, political control, and journalistic norms. From print newspapers and radio broadcasts to 24-hour television news and digital platforms, the modes of war reporting have evolved significantly. Journalists covering wars, they often work under extreme conditions, including restricted access, censorship, surveillance, and threats to personal safety. As a result, much war news depends on official briefings, on military spokespersons, and government statements. This reliance can narrow the range of perspectives presented and privilege state-centric narratives over civilian experiences. Now, let's try to understand media framing of war. Media framing basically refers to the ways in which news organizations they select, they emphasize, and organize information to create particular interpretations of events. In war journalism, frames commonly focus on military strategies and battlefield developments, on national security and territorial integrity, on heroism and sacrifice of soldiers, and on casualty figures and destruction. So while these frames are not inherently inaccurate, they often marginalize broader social, historical, and humanitarian dimensions of conflict. Structural causes such as colonial legacies, economic exploitation, ethnic marginalization, or political repression receive limited attention, reducing the complex conflicts to simplified narratives. Now let's try to look at the different forms of bias in war reporting. Bias in war journalism does not necessarily imply intentional distortion. Instead, it frequently emerges from structural, institutional, and ideological factors. Some of the key forms of bias include source bias. Now, what is source bias? Journalists' dependence on official elite sources leads to the dominance of government and military viewpoints, while voices of civilians, refugees, women and marginalized communities remain underrepresented. The next form of bias is a nationalistic bias. Media often align with national interests during wartime, portraying one side as legitimate and moral while depicting the opponent as aggressive or irrational. This us versus them framing reinforces patriotism and public support for military action. Then we have what is known as language bias. The use of emotionally charged language such as terrorists, martyrs, retaliation, or collateral damage, it shapes audience perceptions and moral judgments. Then we have what is known as visual bias. Images and videos are powerful tools in war reporting. We know that. Selective visuals can humanize one group while dehumanizing another group, thus influencing empathy and outrage. And these biases, they play a crucial role in shaping public opinion, in foreign policy debates and collective memory of conflicts. Thus, war journalism, it tends to focus heavily on violence, on casualties and battlefield actions. It highlights the perspective of governments, military officials and dominant groups. And it prioritizes dramatic images and sensational headlines. It also ignores deeper social, political or historical causes of conflict. And these tendencies, they create a biased understanding of war, shaping how audiences perceive enemies, allies and victims. Now, a question frequently arises as to why bias emerges in war reporting, why biasness is very much seen. Bias in war journalism is not accidental. It emerges due to different factors. First important factor is government influence. Governments often regulate press access during war. And journalists may rely on military briefings which provide only one side of the story. And that creates biasness. Second important factor is media ownership and corporate interest. Large media houses may align with political powers or nationalistic statement, and coverage may be shaped to avoid conflict with government or advertisers. Third important factor is emotional framing and spectacle. The dramatic footage of bombings, soldiers and refugees attracts audiences, and sensational visuals overshadow nuance and context. Fourth important factor is the pressure on journalists. War zones are dangerous, limiting access to diverse voices. Even reporters may face censorship or threats. Fifth important factor is binary narratives. Conflicts are simplified into us versus them stories. And civilian suffering or global humanitarian perspectives are sidelined. These are some of the important factors which leads to biasness in war reporting. Let us move on towards the consequences of biased war journalism. What might happen if there is too much of biasness in war journalism or war reporting? Biased coverage, it influences both national and global opinion. The first important consequence is it creates enemy stereotypes that justify violence. Second important consequence is it legitimizes government actions even when they violate human rights. Third important consequence is it marginalizes peace efforts, negotiations or diplomacy. Another important consequence is it produces fear and polarization. And finally, it shapes foreign policy based on incomplete information. So ultimately, war journalism can become a tool of propaganda rather than a channel for truth. War journalism, it significantly affects social movements, particularly peace movements and anti-war protests and human rights campaigns. Now, media representations can either legitimize these movements or delegitimize them by framing activists as unpatriotic, disruptive, or violent. And in many cases, social movements emerge precisely to challenge dominant war narratives and demand alternative understandings centered on peace, justice, and human security. Peace journalism has emerged as an alternative approach. In response to the limitations of conventional wire journalism, scholars and practitioners have proposed peace journalism. Now, this approach it encourages journalists to provide historical and structural context to conflicts. It encourages a journalist to represent multiple parties and perspectives. It highlights non-violent responses and peace initiatives. So, peace journalism does not advocate neutrality in the face of injustice. Rather, it promotes responsible and conflict-sensitive reporting. It aligns closely with the goals of social movements, seeking long-term social transformation rather than short-term sensationalism. Now let's come to another important part of this unit, that is hate speech and online radicalization. Now let's try to understand hate speech in media. Hate speech, it refers to forms of expression that targets individuals or groups based on identity markers such as religion, ethnicity, caste, race, gender, nationality, or political ideology. Such communication seeks to demean, exclude, or incite hostility and violence. While hate speech is not a new phenomenon, digital media have dramatically amplified its reach and impact. Online environments often enable anonymity and reduce accountability, making it easier for users to express extreme views. Social media platforms, comment sections, and messaging apps provide spaces where hateful narratives can circulate rapidly and widely. And hate speech includes expressions that attack or dehumanize people based on religion, based on caste, race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, nationality, or political ideology. And different online platforms like Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, YouTube, it enables hate messages to circulate rapidly. Now let's come to algorithmic amplification and polarization. Digital platforms that are driven by algorithms, we all know that are designed to maximize user engagement. Content that provokes strong emotional reactions such as anger, fear, or outrage is more likely to be shared and promoted. As a result, hate speech and polarizing content often receive disproportionate visibility. And this process contributes to the creation of echo chambers, where users are repeatedly exposed to similar viewpoints while opposing perspectives are excluded. And over a period of time, such environments normalize hostility and reduce opportunities for dialogue. Now let's look at the processes of online radicalization. Online radicalization is a gradual process through which individuals adopt extreme beliefs and in some cases support or engage in violence. Media play a central role in this process by introducing simplified narratives that divide the world into good and evil, using symbols, memes, and emotionally charged stories to create a sense of belongingness, framing violence as justified or heroic. Radical content often exploits real grievances such as unemployment, discrimination, or political marginalization, but redirects them towards exclusionary or violent ideologies. Let's look at the impact on social cohesion and movements. Hate speech and online radicalization pose serious challenges to social cohesion and democratic participation. They deepen social divisions, undermine trust in institutions, and create hostile environments for marginalized groups. Peaceful social movements may be delegitimized or attacked through coordinated online harassment and disinformation campaigns. At the same time, media are also used to counter hate and extremism. Civil society organizations, activists, and educators employ counter narratives, digital campaigns, and media literacy initiatives to promote inclusion and critical thinking. Now, let's come to the final part of this particular unit, that is trying to understand the context of media and conflict in practice through certain case studies. The first case study that we are going to discuss about is international armed conflicts and global media. Now, global news networks often provide uneven coverage of international conflicts. Some conflicts receive sustained attention due to geopolitical interest, strategic alliances, or proximity to powerful nations, while others remain underreported. This selective visibility influences humanitarian aid, diplomatic pressure, and global public opinion. The framing of such conflicts frequently emphasizes military developments and strategic interests, while humanitarian crisis, displacement, and long-term social consequences receive limited efforts as well as focus. Suppose, for example, let's take the case of the Russia-Ukraine war, which began in 2022 and is still continuing in the present context as well. So the Russia-Ukraine conflict has received sustained and extensive coverage from global news networks such as BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, and Reuters. Continuous reporting, live updates, and expert analysis have shaped global public opinion, intensified diplomatic pressure on Russia, and mobilized large-scale humanitarian aid for Ukraine. However, media framing has largely focused on military strategy, territorial control, and geopolitical consequences, while long-term humanitarian issues such as refugee, integration, trauma, and economic reconstruction often receive comparatively less attention over time. In contrast to the Russia-Ukraine war, we have another example, the Yemen civil war, which began in 2015. Now, despite being one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, the Yemen conflict has received limited and intermittent international media attention. The relative lack of sustained coverage has contributed to weaker global public pressure and delayed humanitarian response. This contrast illustrates how geopolitical interests and strategic alliances influence media visibility of armed conflicts. Let's take a second case study, which will talk about social media, misinformation, and communal tensions. Now, in several countries, viral misinformation and hate speech circulated through social media have contributed to the escalation of communal and ethnic tensions. False rumors, manipulated images, and inflammatory videos often spread faster than verified news, leading to panic, mistrust, and violence. These cases highlight the blurred boundary between online communication and offline conflict, demonstrating how digital media can act as catalysts for social unrest. A prime example in this regard is the communal violence in India that was linked to the WhatsApp rumors that was mostly seen during the period of 2017 to 2018. Now, in several Indian states, including Jharkhand, Assam, and Maharashtra, false rumors circulated via WhatsApp about child kidnappers led to mob violence and lynchings. Manipulated videos and misleading messages spread very rapidly, often outpacing official clarifications. These incidents demonstrate how closed messaging platforms can amplify fear and mistrust, directly translating online misinformation into offline communal violence. A prime example in this regard is the Myanmar and anti-Rohingya violence. Now, social media platforms, particularly Facebook, they were used to circulate hate speech and false narratives against the Rohingya Muslim minority. Viral posts and inflammatory content contributed to ethnic polarization and justified violence actions against a community. So this case highlights how algorithm-driven platforms can intensify ethnic conflict when content moderation is weak. In the third case study, we are going to talk about media and protest movements. The protest movements frequently emerge during periods of conflict and political crisis. Digital media have enabled activists to bypass traditional gatekeepers through citizen journalism, to live streaming and hashtag activism. These practices have brought global attention to human rights violations and state repression. However, the same media tools are also used for surveillance, for misinformation, and the criminalization of dissent. Protest movements thus operate in a complex media environment that simultaneously empowers and constrains them. A very important example in this regard is the Arab Spring uprisings of 2010 to 2012. The protest movements in Tunisia, Egypt, and other Arab countries, it relied heavily on social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter to mobilize citizens, document state violence, and attract global attention. Citizen journalism and viral videos bypassed state-controlled media and played a crucial role in shaping international narratives about democratic resistance. At the same time, governments used digital surveillance and internet shutdowns to monitor activists and suppress dissent. A prime example in this regard are the farmers' protests in India. Now, digital media platforms enabled protesters to share live updates, personal testimonies, and counter-narratives to mainstream media portrayals. Hashtag activism and independent digital outlets brought international visibility to the movement. However, activists also faced online disinformation campaigns, account suspensions, and legal scrutiny, demonstrating how media technologies can both empower protest movements and expose them to control and repression. Now let's come to a very important part of this unit. Since we're talking about media and conflict, so we need to understand the basics of media ethics, responsibility, and conflict-sensitive reporting as well. Media ethics are central to responsible conflict reporting. We all know that. Ethical journalism requires accuracy, fairness, accountability, and respect for human dignity. During conflict situations, journalists and content creators must be specially aware of the potential consequences of their work. And key principles of conflict-sensitive reporting includes avoiding stereotypes and generalizations, verifying information before publication, giving voice to affected communities, being cautious with graphic images and inflammatory language, etc. For digital media platforms, ethical responsibility also involves transparent moderation policies, protection of vulnerable groups, and cooperation with fact-checking initiatives. Media literacy among the citizens is equally important. An informed audience is better equipped to critically evaluate conflict-related content, resist manipulation, and engage constructively in public debate. Media can either escalate conflicts or contribute to their transformation. This we'll try to understand under media, conflict, and social change. Sensationalist reporting, hate speech, and propaganda tend to intensify divisions, while contextualized and ethical communication can foster understanding and dialogue. Social movements play a crucial role in challenging dominant media narratives and advocating alternative visions of peace, justice, and equality. Through strategic communication, storytelling, and digital activism, movements can reshape public discourse and influence policy. Thus, media and conflict are deeply interconnected in the contemporary communication landscape. War journalism, hate speech, and online radicalization illustrate how media practices shape perceptions of violence and social struggle. At the same time, ethical journalism, alternative media, and media literacy initiatives offer pathways towards conflict resolution and social change. For learners of media, cultural dynamics, and social change, understanding this relationship is very much essential. Critical engagement with media content enables citizens not only to interpret conflicts more accurately, but also to participate responsibly in shaping a more just and peaceful society. So as we come to the end of this unit on media and conflict, it is important to pause and reflect on what we have learned and why it matters. Throughout this unit, you have definitely seen that media are not neutral observers of conflict. Whether in the context of war reporting, online hate speech, or social movements, media play an active role in shaping how conflicts are understood, felt, and responded to. We have discussed how war journalism often focuses on violence, on strategy, and national interest, which can limit public understanding of the deeper causes and human consequences of conflict. We also examine how bias, whether through language, visuals, or source selection, can influence public opinion and legitimize certain actions while silencing others. At the same time, you are introduced to alternative approaches such as peace-oriented and conflict-sensitive journalism, which remind us that media can also contribute to understanding dialogue and reconciliation. And in a digital environment, the challenges become even more complex. Hate speech and online radicalization demonstrate how media technologies can be misused to spread fear, hostility, and division. Algorithms that reward emotionally charged content often amplify extreme voices, making conflicts appear sharper and more polarized than they actually are. These processes not only threaten social harmony, but also affect the credibility and safety of genuine social movements that rely on media to express dissent and demand change. However, this unit has also emphasized that media are powerful tools for positive social change. Ethical journalism, responsible platform practices, and active citizen engagement can counter misinformation, challenge dominant narratives, and give visibility to marginalized voices. Social movements, when they use media thoughtfully and ethically, can transform public discourse and influence policies without escalating conflict. As learners of media, culture, and society, your role is very much crucial. Developing the ability to critically analyze media content, question dominant frames, and recognize bias equips you to become informed citizens rather than passive audiences. Media literacy is not just an academic skill. It is a civic responsibility in a world where conflicts are increasingly fought not only on the ground but also through screens, through stories, and through symbols. With this understanding, you are better prepared to engage with media responsibly, contribute to constructive dialogue, and support social movements that seek justice, peace, and meaningful social change. Thank you.